Hello, welcome to the Uninformed College Football Rants podcast. I am your host and my co-host, Keith, right here. Okay, line up the questions, let's go.
Well, you didn't tell him your name.
Oh, yeah, I'm Jack, by the way.
All right. So, Jack, anything more you want to explain about the podcast other than it's you and me sharing our uninformed college football rants?
Well, that's basically it. They're unscripted, uninformed, most importantly, college football rants.
So with that in mind, why don't you tell me, what you see unfolding for Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame? I mean, CFP eventually, or first do we have to see whether they can beat Ohio State?
Well, Freeman probably was not my first choice for Notre Dame head coach. I had Luke Fickell in mind personally, but he seems very content staying at Cincinnati, as you see. But he totally choked in the Fiesta Bowl, which was unfortunate being a Notre Dame fan. But if he can beat Ohio State, then yeah, definitely CFP. If he doesn't, then he should. If he doesn't win the rest of his games, I don't think he's a good coach.
Can they beat Ohio State?
I think they definitely can. They're definitely motivated. I was watching Game Day earlier, and they were like, "We're not scared of Ohio State."
That's what you always say, right?
Yeah,
But do they have the tools? Weapons?
I think that yes. It's just whether they can execute on it. And Ohio State's a really good team. Notre Dame has to play very good, and Ohio State has to mess up and play sloppy in some areas for them to win.
Okay, you've given me an elegant segue to the Ohio State question. After last year, and particularly the beatdown from Michigan at home today, are they coming out with a chip on their shoulder?
Yeah, definitely. They definitely want revenge against Michigan. They're mad they didn't make the CFP. They lost a few weapons, but I think that they're gonna try and come out strong today. I'm not sure whether they will or not. But
so what? How did they retool?
I think that they got some new recruits. They still have a deep wide receiver core despite losing their two best receivers last year. They still have some good guys on the wide receiver core. They hired a new defensive coordinator because their defense last year was a mess.
So if they can mitigate the perceived defects of their defense, do you agree with the conventional wisdom that they're one of the top three and they're very separated from their competition in terms of making the CFP? Like their perceived peers, according to conventional wisdom, are Alabama and Georgia, and then there's no one else.
I think that Alabama and Georgia are just a tad better as a team, but I do definitely think that Ohio State is up there, and if they can win out in a tough conference being the Big Ten and win the Big Ten, I think that they will make the CFP.
Yeah, well, obviously, but that's a big if. The question is, what do you think about the if?
I myself think that they're going to beat most of the teams, like the little teams. They're going to have some close games, Michigan State, Penn State, but they're going to come out in those. I personally think they're going to lose to Michigan.
That's what your heart says. Do your brain say that too?
Yes. Okay. Because Ohio State lost a lot of weapons last year.
C.J. Stroud is super elite? I say so.
I say not. He only was perceived as good last year because he had a lot of elite wide receivers.
Well, that's a wait and see. So, speaking of the elite, how do you see the so-called SEC, self-declared SEC team of the West, Oregon, coming out against Georgia?
This should be fun because it's interesting because Georgia's elite defensive coordinator, Dan Lanning, went to Oregon to be the head coach one day after the national championship. However, I don't think Oregon has the same level of dominance as Georgia.
Yeah. So what's your prediction?
It's going to be a blowout by Georgia, like 38-3, 41-10, or it's going to be crazy.
Well, as a Trojan, of course, I find this to be a treat. Speaking of which,
I find it amusing as well.
What do you see happening with USC and Lincoln Riley Your question, I think, is will they live up to expectations? My question back is, what are the expectations? I think merely doing better than last year's 4-8 is not enough. They're not going to make it to the CFP, but they could go 8-4 or 9-3, and that would be a big improvement. Would that satisfy the Trojans?
Probably not. I honestly disagree with your reasoning. I think that they could win the Pac-12. CFP it could happen, but it's not. It still might not be the most likely thing to happen because they have a lot of gaps to fill on the defensive end.
You never give due weight. You overvalue, I think, teams that you love in your heart, like the Trojans and the Wolverines. What do you have to say about that?
Well,
time will tell.
Time will tell, yes, I agree. I mean, I think that the Wolverines, despite losing some defensive weapons, recruited well this year, and I feel like they still have a lot of high-value players. The Trojans, however, I mean, I like them, but I feel like...
no defensive depth.
No defensive depth, that's correct. Like, their defense is far from elite. They definitely have a lot of gaps to fill. The question is, will their offense score so many points that won't even matter?
Like a basketball score.
Like a basketball score, but, like, I feel like their offense is top 10 in the country, top 5, but their defense is... I mean, it's
Top 150.
Top 150. I mean, it's respectable, but it's not going to stop some elite offenses.
All right. So, not to pin you down, but here's the tough question. Tell me about who you see and how's the end of the season look. What's the CFP going to look like? What's New Year's 6?
Alabama, Georgia, no matter how many games they lose, are definitely going to the CFP. Like a 2-loss Alabama is in over a 1-loss Notre Dame or Cincinnati, I say myself. Maybe not like 3 or 4 losses, but 2 losses Alabama and Georgia maybe even could definitely get in. On the other hand, I feel like Michigan, if they beat Ohio State, is going to make it into the CFP and win the Big Ten. If Ohio State beats
Michigan, if they otherwise win out.
Yeah, if they win like Michigan State, Penn State. But like on the other hand, if Ohio State wins that game and wins the Big Ten, I feel like they're in. Then it could be like Notre Dame, USC, or Utah are my other 3 contenders. I feel like it would be hard for SC with such a poor defense to be able to make the CFP. But I feel like Utah could take some sloppy losses, including SC. So Notre Dame is probably my other team, unless like a Cincinnati-type team does it again.
A&M?
A&M, maybe. It's just they have they have a tough schedule. They play in the SEC. They play Alabama.
Clemson?
Clemson, no way. Last year they won the Cheez-It Bowl by a hair. I mean, how low can you get? They went from number 2 in the country to the Cheez-It Bowl.
Any closing comments?
Not necessarily. So I think
this is the end of this podcast, and we'll reconvene with a guest soon.
Tomorrow we'll be back for a game recap.